In a quiet village in Nigeria, there lived a young man named Kunle. Kunle was known for his handsome face, charm, and smooth way with words. But there was something more that bothered him deeply: his struggle with poverty. Every day, Kunle would walk through the village, seeing his peers driving fancy cars, living in big houses, and enjoying the good things of life. He dreamed of living that kind of life, but his situation seemed hopeless. One day, while on his usual walk through the market, Kunle overheard a conversation between two old women. They were gossiping about a wealthy woman in the village named Madam Abeni. She was much older than Kunle, perhaps even old enough to be his mother. But what caught Kunle's attention was the rumor that Madam Abeni was looking for a husband. And she wasn't looking for just any man. She wanted a young, strong, and handsome man. The rumor spread like wildfire, and Kunle's mind began to race. Madam Abeni, though old, was known for her wealth. She owned several businesses, including the largest farm in the village, and was said to have piles of money stashed away. She had no children and no one to inherit her fortune.
If he married her, Kunle thought, all her wealth would eventually belong to him.
Kunle's friend, Tunde, who had heard the same rumors, laughed when Kunle mentioned the idea. "You? Marry that old woman just for her money?" Tunde teased. "Are you really that desperate?" Kunle shrugged off the taunts. "Tunde, this could be my chance to escape poverty," he said, his voice determined. "I will live the life I've always dreamed of." And so, Kunle made up his mind. The very next day, he dressed in his best clothes and went to Madam Abeni's mansion. It was grand, with high walls and beautiful gardens. Kunle's heart raced as he knocked on the large wooden door. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and there stood Madam Abeni, dressed in fine silk, her grey hair wrapped neatly in a headscarf. She smiled warmly at Kunle, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What brings a young man like you to my home?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Kunle took a deep breath and spoke boldly. "Madam Abeni, I have heard of your great wealth and your search for a husband. I believe I am the man you are looking for." Madam Abeni chuckled softly. "And why would a young handsome man like you want to marry an old woman like me?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Kunle was caught off guard by her question. He had expected her to be flattered, maybe even eager, but instead, she was calm and calculating. He fumbled for an answer, then smiled his charming smile. "Madam, it is not just your wealth that attracts me. I see a wise and strong woman who can teach me many things. Together we could build something greater." Madam Abeni stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, Kunle. I will consider your proposal. But marrying me will not be as easy as you think. You must prove yourself worthy." Kunle's heart leapt with excitement. "I will do anything you ask, Madam Abeni." She smiled again, this time a little more mischievously. "Good. Let's see if you have what it takes." Kunle left the mansion that evening, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't know what Madam Abeni had in store for him, but he was sure of one thing. He was going to be rich. As he walked home, the sun setting behind him, he imagined the life of luxury that awaited him. But little did Kunle know, his decision to marry for money would soon lead him down a path filled with challenges and unexpected consequences. Kunle could hardly sleep that night. Thoughts of wealth and luxury filled his dreams. He imagined himself living in Madam Abeni's mansion, driving expensive cars, and dining at the finest restaurants. But he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Madam Abeni's words about proving himself were a warning. What kind of test would she give him? The next morning, as the sun rose, Kunle made his way back to Madam Abeni's mansion. His heart was pounding, but he kept reminding himself of his goal, the money, the riches, the life he always wanted. When he arrived at the mansion, he was greeted by Madam Abeni's housekeeper, Mama Ekaete, an elderly woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through Kunle. "Madam is expecting you," she said, gesturing for him to follow. Kunle was led to the grand sitting room, where Madam Abeni sat sipping tea. She greeted him with a calm smile but wasted no time. "Kunle," she began, "you said you wanted to marry me. But before we can discuss that further, I need to know if you are a man of your word." Kunle nodded eagerly. "I am, madam. I will do anything to prove myself." Madam Abeni leaned back in her chair and looked at him closely. "Very well. Your first task is simple but important. I want you to take this basket of food to my workers at the farm," she said, pointing to a large woven basket on the table. Kunle was confused. A task this simple couldn't be what she meant by proving himself, could it? But he didn't argue. "Of course, madam," he said, picking up the basket. The farm was located on the outskirts of the village, and Kunle made his way there. It was a long walk under the scorching sun, and by the time he arrived, he was exhausted. But what surprised him most was the size of the farm. It was enormous, with rows of crops stretching as far as the eye could see. The workers, who were busy tending to the fields, looked up as Kunle approached. Baba Saliu, the foreman, was an old man who had been working for Madam Abeni for as long as anyone could remember. He eyed Kunle suspiciously. "You must be the new young man Madam Abeni has been talking about," Baba Saliu said, wiping sweat from his brow. "What brings you here?" Kunle handed him the basket. "Madam Abeni sent me to bring food for the workers," he explained. Baba Saliu nodded but didn't seem impressed. She's testing you, you know?" Kunle frowned. "Testing me? How?" The old man chuckled. "If you think carrying a basket of food is all there is, you're in for a surprise." Kunle was about to ask what he meant when one of the workers called out. There was a problem at the far end of the farm. The irrigation system had broken, and without water, the crops would die. Kunle watched as the workers scrambled to fix the issue, but it was clear they needed help. This was his chance to show that he was capable. Without thinking twice, Kunle rolled up his sleeves and joined the workers in repairing the system. It was tough work, and the sun beat down mercilessly, but Kunle pushed through, determined to prove himself. Hours later, the irrigation system was fixed, and water flowed through the fields once again. Baba Saliu patted Kunle on the back. "You did good, boy. Maybe you're not just here for the money after all." Kunle smiled, though his body ached from the labor. He hadn't expected to work so hard, but he was proud of himself. Maybe this was what Madam Abeni wanted to see, that he wasn't afraid of hard work. When Kunle returned to the mansion later that evening, Madam Abeni was waiting for him. She looked at him, sweaty and tired, and nodded approvingly. "You did well today, Kunle," she said. "But that was just the beginning. If you truly want to be with me, there will be more challenges ahead. Remember, a life of wealth requires more than just desire. It requires strength and endurance." Kunle felt a chill run down his spine. He had passed the first test, but it was clear that Madame Abeni had much more in store for him. As he left the mansion that night, Kunle wondered if he had made the right choice. The promise of wealth still called to him, but at what cost? What other challenges would he have to face before he could claim the life he wanted? Kunle woke up the next morning with aching muscles and a restless mind. His determination to marry Madam Abeni and live the life of wealth and luxury had not faded, but now he realized that getting there might be more difficult than he had imagined. What other tests would Madam Abeni throw his way? As the sun rose over the village, Kunle prepared himself for another day at Madam Abeni's mansion. When he arrived, Mama Ekaete greeted him at the door again, this time with a serious look on her face. "Madam is waiting for you in the garden," she said, and without another word, she led him through the large mansion to the back, where the lush green garden spread out like a paradise. Kunle spotted Madam Abeni sitting on a stone bench, admiring the beautiful flowers that filled the air with sweet fragrance. She motioned for him to sit beside her. "Kunle," she began, her voice soft but firm. "You handled the farm well yesterday. I see you are not afraid of hard work, and that is a good thing. But a marriage to me is not just about physical strength. You must prove that you can handle responsibility and that you can think on your feet." Kunle nodded, eager to prove himself again. "What do you want me to do, madam?" Madam Abeni's eyes twinkled, as though she knew something Kunle didn't. "Today, I need you to handle something delicate. I want you to go to the market and collect money from my debtors. Some of them owe me large sums, and I need someone I can trust to bring it back safely." Kunle's heart skipped a beat. He knew the market was a lively place, but it was also full of people who would do anything to avoid paying their debts. And carrying large sums of money in public could be dangerous. But Kunle couldn't back down now. "Consider it done, madam," Kunle said confidently. Madam Abeni handed him a list of names and amounts. "Be careful, Kunle. Some people will not want to part with their money easily. Use your charm, but don't be foolish." Kunle set off for the market, determined to succeed. As he walked through the busy streets, the hustle and bustle of people bargaining, selling, and trading filled the air. He approached the first name on the list, a man named Alhaji Musa, who ran a fabric stall. "Good afternoon, Alhaji," Kunle greeted him politely. "Madam Abeni has sent me to collect what you owe." Alhaji Musa, a stout man with a bushy beard, frowned when he heard Madam Abeni's name. "That woman again, always asking for her money," he muttered under his breath. But after a moment, he sighed and handed Kunle a bag of coins. "Here, take it. Tell her that's the last time she'll see me owing anything." Kunle smiled and thanked him before moving on to the next debtor, a woman named Iyasade who sold spices. But things weren't as easy with her. When Kunle approached her and mentioned Madame Abeni's name, her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms over her chest. "Tell Madame Abeni I don't have her money," Iyasade snapped. "Times are hard and I haven't made enough to pay her back." Kunle hesitated, remembering Madam Abeni's warning. He tried to reason with Iyasade. Madam Abeni is fair, and she wouldn't ask for more than what's owed. "Perhaps you can give what you have for now, and we can arrange the rest later." But Iyasade was stubborn. "No, I'm not giving a single naira until my business picks up." Kunle felt the tension rising. He knew this was a test of his patience and negotiation skills, but he also didn't want to leave empty-handed. After a moment of thinking, he decided to back off for now. "Very well, Iyasade. I'll inform Madame Abeni of your situation." As Kunle continued collecting debts, he encountered similar resistance from some and cooperation from others. By the end of the day, he had gathered a respectable amount of money, but there were still a few names left unpaid. He knew Madame Abeni would want to know what happened. When Kunle returned to the mansion, he found Madame Abeni waiting for him in the grand hall. She looked at the money he had collected and then raised an eyebrow. Not all of it, I see, she remarked calmly. Kunle nodded, his hands slightly trembling. I did my best, madam. Some people are struggling and couldn't pay today. But I assured them you would understand. Madam Abeni stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. He had passed another test. But as he prepared to leave for the night, Madame Abeni called him back. Kunle, she said softly. You're doing well, but you must understand something. Marrying me won't just give you wealth. It will also come with great responsibility. You'll be expected to manage my affairs, protect what I've built, and face challenges much greater than the ones you've seen so far. Kunle nodded, though his mind was filled with questions. Was this really what he wanted? The money still called to him, but the weight of responsibility was beginning to show itself. As he walked home, Kunle wondered what the future held. Would Madame Abeni's wealth be worth the trials he was facing, and what other tests awaited him before he could claim the life he desired? Kunle's mind was clouded with doubt as he made his way back to Madame Abeni's mansion the next morning. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village. The tests Madame Abeni had put him through were becoming more than simple tasks. They were forcing him to confront what kind of man he truly was. Yet, every time he questioned himself, the thought of wealth, of finally escaping poverty, pushed him forward. As he approached the mansion, Mama Ekaite met him at the gate with a more somber look than usual. Madam Abeni is expecting you in her private chambers today, she said, her voice softer than before. When Kunle entered the chambers, he saw Madame Abeni seated at an ornate table covered in papers, ledgers, and documents. It was clear she was the one truly running everything in the village, and the sight of her, immersed in her work, reminded Kunle of just how powerful she was. She paused, leaning forward as if to study his face. Today, I need your help with something delicate. There's a piece of land that belongs to a widow, Mama Folake. She's behind on her payments and, unfortunately, I must either take the land or make a deal that will leave her with nothing. I want you to handle this negotiation. Kunle's heart sank. He had heard of Mama Folake, a poor elderly woman who had lost her husband and struggled to care for her children. The idea of taking away the little she had left didn't sit well with him, but the look on Madame Abeni's face told him this was part of the test. This was more than about handling money, it was about loyalty, and perhaps ruthlessness. Madam, Kunle began cautiously. I understand the importance of business, but isn't there another way? Perhaps we could give her more time? Madame Abeni smiled faintly, though her eyes remained sharp. That is for you to decide, Kunle. But remember, business is not about sentiment. It's about survival and strength. I'm asking you to handle this not just as a task, but as a decision maker. What you choose will tell me if you are ready to stand beside me in this life. Kunle left the mansion in deep thought. For the first time, the weight of his ambition felt heavy. It wasn't just about tasks anymore, it was about becoming someone capable of making hard moral choices. He had to decide what kind of man he would be if he continued down this path. When Kunle arrived at Mama Folake's small rundown home, he found her sitting outside with her children, tending to her garden. She looked up and smiled warmly when she saw him approach, not knowing the burden he carried. Kunle, my son, it's good to see you, she said, her voice gentle. Kunle struggled to find his words. Mama Folake, I've come to talk about the land, he said hesitantly. Madam Abeni sent me. The warmth in Mama Folake's face faded. She knew what this visit meant. He knelt beside Mama Folake, his voice low but firm. I want to help you, Mama. Madam Abeni wants the land, but I believe there's another way. If I can convince her to give you more time, would you be able to make the payments? Mama Folake's eyes filled with tears. I would try, Kunle. I swear on my husband's name, I will do everything I can. Kunle knew the risks. Going back to Madam Abeni with a compromise instead of enforcing her will could mean the end of his chances with her. But something in his heart told him that doing the right thing mattered more than wealth. When Kunle returned to Madam Abeni later that evening, his hands were trembling. She sat, as always, in her grand chamber, waiting for his report. Did you take care of it? She asked, her voice cool and controlled. Kunle stood tall, though he could feel the weight of his decision. I spoke with Mama Folake. She's willing to make the payments if given more time. I didn't take the land, madam. Madam Abeni's eyes narrowed, and the room felt as if it had grown colder. You disobeyed me, she said softly, her voice laced with disappointment. Kunle swallowed hard. I didn't disobey you, madam. I made a decision. You asked me to think like a man who could stand by your side. That's what I've done. I believe there's value in giving her a chance. For what felt like an eternity, Madam Abeni said nothing. She simply stared at Kunle, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. You've surprised me, Kunle, she said slowly. Madam Abeni rose from her chair and walked toward him, her gaze unwavering. This test wasn't just about business. It was about seeing whether you could make a hard choice and stand by it, even if it meant losing what you wanted. You've passed. For now. Kunle exhaled, the tension in his body releasing, but he knew this was far from the end. Madam Abeni was still a mystery, and he had a long way to go before he could truly understand her world. As Kunle left the mansion that night, he realized that the path he had chosen was more complicated than he had imagined. Wealth wasn't just about riches, it came with heavy responsibilities and moral dilemmas. He had passed another test, but at what cost? Kunle's nights were becoming restless, filled with dreams of Madam Abeni's tests and the growing weight of his choices. His once simple desire for wealth had led him down a path he hadn't anticipated. He had passed the most recent challenge by following his conscience, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Madam Abeni's approval was fragile. The next morning, as Kunle walked through the village, whispers followed him. It seemed the villagers were already talking about him. Some admired his courage for standing up to Madam Abeni, while others doubted he had what it took to survive in her world. When he arrived at the mansion, Mama Akete greeted him, as always, but this time with a curious expression. You're making waves, young man, she said, her tone carrying both caution and approval. But be careful. Madam Abeni doesn't test people for fun. Kunle nodded, feeling the tension in his gut. He knew Mama Eketi was right. Madam Abeni's tests weren't just about proving his worth, they were about shaping him. He wondered how much of himself he was willing to lose for wealth. He was led into Madam Abeni's grand sitting room, where she was seated, staring out of the large window that overlooked her vast estate. When Kunle entered, she turned, her face unreadable. Kunle, she began, you've proven to me that you can make tough decisions, but there's more to being by my side than just choosing between right and wrong. Loyalty, absolute loyalty, is what I demand. Today, you'll be tested in that regard. Kunle tensed. The way she spoke made him uneasy, as though the challenge ahead would push him further than before. I have a close associate, Chief Okoye, Madam Abeni continued. We've been doing business together for years, but recently, I've learned that he's been dishonest, stealing from our shared ventures. However, Chief Okoye is powerful, and confronting him could have consequences. Your task today is simple. I want you to find out if he's truly betraying me. Kunle frowned. And if he is? Madam Abeni's eyes hardened. If he is, you'll expose him. But be careful, he's not a man to be taken lightly. Kunle left the mansion, his mind swirling with uncertainty. Investigating a man as powerful as Chief Okoye was dangerous. One wrong step, and he could make a powerful enemy. Yet, he couldn't refuse. This was his test of loyalty. When Kunle arrived at Chief Okoye's estate, it was nothing short of magnificent. Grand pillars held up a massive stone house, surrounded by lush gardens and expensive cars. Chief Okoye was a man of influence, with connections that stretched far beyond the village. The guards at the gate let Kunle in, and soon he was face to face with the chief. Chief Okoye greeted Kunle with a hearty laugh and a firm handshake. "Ah, Kunle," Chief Okoye boomed. "I've heard of you, the young man Madam Abeni has taken an interest in. To what do I owe this visit?" Kunle forced a smile, trying to stay composed. "I've come to discuss some business matters on behalf of Madam Abeni," he said carefully, choosing his words. "There have been some concerns about recent transactions, and I've been asked to clarify a few things." Chief Okoye's smile faltered slightly, but he kept his jovial demeanor. "Concerns? What kind of concerns?" Kunle hesitated. He could sense the tension growing in the room, but he had to stay focused. "It seems there have been discrepancies in the profits from your joint ventures with Madam Abeni. I'm here to find out if there's an explanation." For a moment, Chief Okoye's face darkened. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You're accusing me of stealing from her, aren't you?" Kunle knew he had to tread carefully. "No accusations, Chief. I'm simply here to gather information." The chief stood up, his eyes flashing with anger. "Let me tell you something, boy. You're playing a dangerous game, aligning yourself with Madam Abeni. She's powerful, yes, but her power doesn't reach as far as mine. You're smart to be loyal to her, but if you cross me, you'll regret it." Kunle felt his heart race. The chief's warning wasn't empty. He was in dangerous waters, and one wrong move could cost him everything. But he also knew that going back to Madame Abeni without answers wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, Kunle stood his ground. "Chief, I'm only doing my job. If there's nothing to hide, then this should be a simple matter to resolve." For a long moment, Chief Okoye glared at Kunle, his expression unreadable. Then, to Kunle's surprise, the chief's face broke into a smile once more, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Very well, Kunle, you'll have your answers. But remember this, loyalty is a dangerous thing. It can change overnight." Kunle left the estate feeling unsettled. Chief Okoye had given him some documents to take back to Madame Abeni, but something about the interaction didn't sit right with him. He couldn't tell if the chief was hiding something or if he had just been warned to stay out of things he didn't understand. When Kunle returned to Madame Abeni's mansion, he handed her the documents, his mind still racing with uncertainty. She flipped through them, her face unreadable. Then she looked up at Kunle. "What do you think?" she asked. Kunle hesitated. He knew that his answer mattered. This was another test of loyalty. "I think Chief Okoye is hiding something, madam," he said slowly. "He gave me the documents, but I don't trust him." Madam Abeni nodded, her expression cool. "Good. You've learned to trust your instincts. Chief Okoye has been a valuable partner for many years, but loyalty can fade, especially when money is involved. She stood up, walking to the window and gazing out over her estate. Kunle, you've passed another test. But remember, loyalty is more important than anything. In this world, people will betray you for far less than you imagine. Kunle felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Each test was pulling him deeper into Madame Abeni's world, and with each step, he felt his moral compass being challenged. The promise of wealth was still there, but the cost was becoming clearer. As he left the mansion that evening, Kunle wondered if loyalty to Madam Abeni would mean losing his loyalty to himself. Kunle's steps felt heavier with each day. The pressure of Madam Abeni's tests weighed on his conscience. He could sense that something big was coming, something that would force him to make a final decision. Was this life of wealth and power really worth the cost? He had seen the influence and luxury that came with Madame Abeni's world, but also the moral compromises, the corruption, and the pain it brought to others. As he arrived at the mansion, the air felt different, thicker, more tense. Mama Eketi greeted him with a concerned look. Madam Abeni is waiting for you in the main hall, she said quietly. Kunle entered the grand hall, where Madam Abeni stood beside a large table, a small wooden box in front of her. Her eyes were sharper than ever, and the air around her seemed to crackle with authority. Kunle, she began, her voice steady, you've proven yourself capable, loyal, and strong. But today is the final test. What I'm about to ask you will determine your future, not just with me, but in this world of wealth and power. Kunle's heart pounded. He had been expecting something difficult, but the intensity in Madam Abeni's gaze made him realize this was more than just another challenge. She gestured to the wooden box on the table. Inside this box is a document, a contract. It's a deal with Chief Okoye. You remember him, don't you? He's betrayed me, as you suspected. This contract will ruin him, financially and socially. By signing it, you'll ensure that I rise above him and that our partnership will grow stronger. But you'll also be helping to destroy a man's life. Kunle's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The final test wasn't about physical endurance or cleverness, it was about his soul. Was he willing to crush someone else for the sake of wealth and power? Madam Abeni continued, her eyes locked onto his. If you sign it, Kunle, your place beside me will be guaranteed. You'll have all the wealth you've ever dreamed of. But understand this, signing it will mean you've chosen this life, fully and completely. There's no going back. Kunle stared at the box, his mind racing. He had come so far. He had passed every test. The promise of wealth, comfort and influence lay just within his grasp. But at what cost? Was he truly ready to destroy another man's life for his own gain? Finally Kunle spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Madam Abeni, I've learned a lot from you. You've shown me how the world works, how power can be used to control people, and how wealth can change lives. But I've also learned something more important, there are some things money can't buy. Madam Abeni's expression didn't change, but her eyes seemed to flicker with understanding. I can't sign that contract, Kunle continued. I won't be responsible for destroying another person's life, no matter how much it benefits me. If I have to lose everything to keep my integrity, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. For a long moment, the room was silent. Madame Abeni stared at Kunle, her face unreadable. Then to his surprise, a slow smile spread across her lips. You've made your choice, she said softly. And it's a brave one. Kunle blinked, unsure of what to make of her reaction. Madam Abeni walked over to him, her tone suddenly warmer. almost approving. This was the real test, Kunle. I needed to see if you were willing to sacrifice your soul for wealth. Many men would have signed that contract without a second thought. But you didn't. That tells me you're stronger than I thought. Kunle frowned, confused. So, this was all? Madam Abeni nodded. Yes. I've been testing more than your loyalty. I've been testing your character. And you've shown me that you're a man who values more than just riches. You've passed the final test. Kunle felt a wave of relief wash over him. He hadn't lost himself after all. But he knew this meant the end of his path with Madam Abeni. I understand if this means I can't be by your side anymore, Kunle said, his voice steady. Madam Abeni smiled. You're right. This life isn't for you, Kunle. But that doesn't mean you've failed. In fact, you've succeeded in the most important way. You've stayed true to who you are. And that is something far more valuable than any wealth I could offer. Kunle nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had made the right choice, and he was ready to move forward, without the riches, but with his integrity intact. As he left Madam Abeni's mansion for the last time, Kunle knew that his journey wasn't over. He would find his way in the world, but this time, he would do it on his own terms. Moral of the story: the pursuit of wealth and power can lead to moral compromises, but in the end, staying true to your values and integrity is more important than any riches. Kunle's journey teaches us that while wealth may seem appealing, the cost of losing yourself isn't worth it. True strength comes from standing by what you believe in, even when the stakes are high. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed Kunle's story and the lessons it brought, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more African tales and inspiring stories.